Thank you for joining us for our next series on a different point of view. And here with us in studio is Missy Shorey. She is the chair for the Dallas County GOP, and Carol Donovan, who is the chair for the Dallas Democrat Party for the Dallas County, correct?
Yes.
Okay, good. So, polar opposites, maybe not.
Yeah, she wore the red dress and I got the blue.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Well, here we are in the middle of election cycle, and I wanted to talk about the Kavanaugh hearings. So I know everyone's coming from a different point of view. I think that no matter which side you're on, I think it's sad that we have come to this. What are your thoughts on this, Carol?
Well, I would say I was very empathetic with Dr. Ford's testimony, and I was also empathetic with what Judge Kavanaugh was going through. I mean, if you take what both of them say at face value, then he can't recall anything like this ever happening. And she obviously can. And I thought it was really important that both Republicans and Democrats came away from her testimony saying that she was very credible. They didn't cut her down. They didn't try to mess up her story. They just said she was credible. Now, whether or not it was Judge Kavanaugh that did the action that she's accused him of doing, that, of course, was debated. But what I was taken with more than anything else is that as divided as the parties were on the votes, when it came down to the final vote, Senator Jeff Flake voted in a way that was not Republican, nor was it Democrat. He just went with what he, honest to goodness, thought was in the best interest of the country.
Do you agree with that, Missy?
I think we need to back up to the point where we're looking, you asked the question, what do we think of the hearings? So the hearings are literally a moment and marker in time. There is the United States before the Kavanaugh hearings, and there is it after. The issue is, where do we go? Our friends on the left would like to scream at you in an elevator and shake all sense of decorum, whereas the leadership on the right extended every courtesy to Dr. Ford, which is absolutely the appropriate thing to do. I would argue that it would be a really different world right now if the left would exchange similar courtesies and let the process play out. We're not seeing that, and it's a shame, and it's got to stop.
Well, I think it's interesting how different people have different perspectives. Mm-hmm. I do think that the reason why the Republican senators hired a female prosecutor to ask the questions was because they realized that it might be more comfortable for Dr. Ford to have a woman asking her questions. And I think that they also thought that it wasn't going to look good for having men asking her questions about her sexual assault claim. I think that we got to be a little more fair, I think, in accusing people of yelling and screaming.
You said that wasn't yelling and screaming, and would you be comfortable when someone did that to you in an elevator, Carol?
I don't think anybody would be comfortable with yelling and screaming.
Do you think that that's the proper decorum in which when we go to the United States Senate we should function and act like?
No, those are two people that you're talking about. And what I also think that we ought to consider, if we want to talk about how people had bad behavior, you can talk about Lindsey Graham. And he did a lot of yelling and screaming during the Senate hearings, which was not really appropriate for
Well, he didn't tell anybody to shut up, an entire gender to shut up, which is what's happening on the left. It is just outrageous.
Well, you agree that maybe after a certain level of frustration, I'm sure that it was Lindsey Graham felt exhausted. I mean, would that be appropriate? I mean, because I think many people were like, when it got to the school yearbook, it was like the school yearbook. We're talking about the school yearbook. I mean, did you have a sense of that as well? I mean, just as an American, to think we're going through someone's school yearbook. Did you have a sense that really that? I mean, did you? I don't know. That's why I'm asking. Honestly, asking. Did you have a sense that that was one question that was just like kind of ridiculous to cover a school yearbook in a Supreme Court hearing?
Well, let me answer it two ways. Number one, I was invited here because I thought we were going to concentrate on what the parties had in common.
Yes.
Number two, if you're going to talk about whether something is true or not that happened back in high school, it's very relevant to look at what was written in a school yearbook back in high school. It's also relevant how the person explains it. Because the event that she's talking about is back in high school. Now, there's some people who think that if something happened back in high school, it doesn't matter. There's others who feel like that the entire process of sexual harassment or sexual assault does not lend itself to immediately accusing your accuser and coming out and going to the police and going to other assault agencies that handle that, and that it's very common for the person to not do that. So I believe that the reason why she was heard was because it was very natural for it to not have come out back in high school. And so she was given her say. They listened to her testimony.
She was actually forced to give her say. You know, think about it. I just think we're very clear in an agreement that something horrible has happened to her in her experience. The unfortunate thing is there's no corroborating evidence at this point, but that FBI investigation will play out, and we will all wait to see the outcomes there.
Right.
Absolutely. And like the president says, perhaps this may be a blessing in disguise. So that's something to consider there. It is very important that we start looking and saying, where is that line in terms of working with the victims and the reporting from the victims? That's really important. And also, I think another thing that may be getting missed, and it was very interesting, one of the top experts on rape crisis, it was an organization, forgive me for not remembering the name, they said 1 in 3 women experience sexual violence in their lifetime, and that 1 in 6 men men or boys experience sexual violence in their lifetime. So I'm really hoping we can look at this moment collaboratively and say that this is not about gender, because so much of it is getting wrapped up in gender politics, but rather this is about an element where we need to respect the individual and their sanctity and be there for one another, as opposed to making this a taboo, for example. That conversation, the taboo era needs to be over. At the same time, where's that line between taboo and privacy? I think we're going to really be trying to find our way in the next couple of months, if not years, on that front. But it is the era of harming people and going after them. And the predators, be warned. Your day is done. From the Catholic Church, if that may be the case, to institutions, to individual behaviors, that day is done. But at the same time, we need to recognize, let's not have the Salem witch trial happen all over again. We're just we need to be very careful through this process. I'm not saying that's what's here. We need to make sure we're all responsible for where this goes forward.
Well, and I agree with you. With the statistics that you mentioned, using your statistics, there's twice as many women that are affected by sexual assault. And that's probably why a lot of people do see it as a gender item. But I think we need to be careful about calling this the Salem witch trials. If I were in charge, and I'm not, as soon as I heard the allegations, I would have requested that the FBI reopen their investigation.
I wish Dianne Feinstein had you on speed dial, because she certainly didn't move it forward. She hit it as a gotcha. And in the meantime, she abused, I'm sorry to interrupt, Carol, she abused the confidentiality that had been seriously requested by Dr. Ford. And then the media jumps on and harangues her life. That is not a way to treat a victim.
Well, this is a difference in what I heard and you heard on the testimony. I heard Dianne Feinstein explain that when she first got the information, she was asked to not release the name of the victim, and she believed that she was respecting that privacy. She says she did not release the name of the victim. She says that her staff did not release it. And for anyone to assume that she did is really not even going along our own system of justice, which is you're innocent until proven guilty. It'd be just as wrong to assume that Dianne Feinstein is guilty as it is to assume that Judge Kavanaugh is guilty. Had the FBI investigation been open before they had this judiciary hearing, then the FBI could have investigated and said, there's something to it or there's not something to it.
That's completely up to Senator Feinstein and her team. They did this in a very, very inappropriate manner that I believe is very harmful to Dr. Ford.
Well, it's important to point out that the chairman of the Judiciary Committee did not want to reopen the FBI. The president of the United States did not want to reopen.
So you're saying, so Dianne Feinstein did not want an FBI investigation? I just want to
My understanding was that she did once the victim came forward. But what the Senate kept telling us is that only President Trump had the power to reopen the FBI investigation. Now, if that's true, then Dianne Feinstein could not on her own have reopened the investigation, nor could Grassley. But as chair of the committee, Grassley could have requested that it be reopened. And our President Trump could have looked at the situation and said, I want to reopen this. And there's a lot of, it's easy for us to look back and say how we would have done it. But I keep thinking that if I was Judge Kavanaugh, rather than having this blown up testimony going back and forth, as we saw in, this past week, I would have rather just reopened the FBI investigation. And if they found that there was nothing to corroborate any of the claims, then I think that they would have gone on with a much more peaceful Judiciary Committee meeting.
I think you and I have a fundamental disagreement in that to think that Dianne Feinstein didn't play politics here. I just have a very hard time understanding that. As a person who used to work in the United States Senate, it is a political body. It is. And so from that standpoint, she is the one who caused more damage to Dr. Ford and her family than anyone else. And maybe it's not her, maybe it's someone on her staff. But I'll tell you what, that was appalling. And then when you look at what's happened to Dr. Ford's life, it's terrible the way the media went after her, the way they were harassing people that she worked with. I mean, they essentially forced her hand. And if Dianne Feinstein wasn't playing politics, then why was she giving the names of attorneys that ended up getting employed by this? And her attorneys aren't playing straight because they're not even letting their client know that Chairman Grassley was willing to fly out to California to take her testimony, to do anything to accommodate her. I will tell you this. As a person who used to be one of those young staffers on the Senate committee, you didn't get a Coke, you got water, and you had to show up, and you had to put your statements out there, etc. So the accommodations that have been made here are truly inspiring. And yet what we're seeing is that the left is taking advantage of this, and at every time, I guarantee you, let's fast forward. It's already starting to happen. I guarantee you within 48 hours, there's going to be a whole different expansion and request for delay. This, unfortunately, is a political game where the future and the sacredness of democracy is being played as a political pawn in order to run out the clock to the midterms. That's all this is about,
Karen,
unfortunately, for the politics.
I want to make a general observation, and that is that you and I discussed that this was going to be a discussion on how the parties can get along. Mm-hmm. And so far, it's not. And that's fine if y'all want to have a discussion about how the Republicans and Democrats disagree about the Kavanaugh hearing. But one of the things, if we are, in fact, going to talk about how the parties can get along, one thing that is very imperative is that we not stereotype each party. We don't call them the left or the right. And I think it's also important that we don't assume blame where you don't really have any evidence to show blame.
Well, I I take ownership of that if you feel that we have put you here under different pretense. I want to come together. I want to find, but I think we do that best by having an open, honest conversation. And I think that I want to hear what you have to say. I want to hear how these hearings are tearing this country apart. We have women meeting men yelling in elevators, and I can imagine that I wouldn't like that on either side. I wouldn't like a Republican doing that to a Democrat. I'm assuming you wouldn't want a Democrat doing that to a Republican. So I think we have to have a way where, and I started with you open and honestly, and I know Missy is having her position, and I want to hear both your positions, even though they're a different point of view. So we're going to come back after a quick break, and we'll start with you again, and then you tell us how we can come together, because that's the most important thing. I think that what happened, as I said in the beginning, to Dr. Ford and to Judge Kavanaugh is not anything anyone in America should be proud of. So we can begin a conversation to say there were some crossed lines, and I think you have to agree to that. You agree to that?
I don't think it was handled well. No.
Okay, good place to stop on, and we'll start back after the break.
He voted. He voted on what he thought the right thing to do would be to reopen the investigation. If I was Kavanaugh, I would want them to reopen the investigation. He's saying, if we take what he says at face value, he says that he's telling the truth. Whatever investigations that already occurred, none of them occurred before these allegations came out. And so you're like, hey, if I didn't do it, then fine. Have the FBI go out and check it out. And if they can't find any corroboration, then they're going to come back and report that.
See, this is what's important to me, Carol. I don't want any conversation shut down, like, oh, I can't talk about that. Oh, I can't. That's not good for the broader audience. You see what I'm saying?
Well,
I hope we're being civil, and I think we are.
Yeah, we're being civil. I just didn't know that was going to be the tone.
Well, I think the tone is civil. I mean, I think but there are things that we have to be able to say, oh, ouch, maybe there's a different way. And my hope is that there's a different way to have a conversation and to agree on certain things and disagree on certain things. I can agree and you can disagree, but we can do it in a way where we can still have the conversation. Mm-hmm. Do you see what I'm saying? I think that's what's important.
Well, I mean, I don't expect y'all to agree with me on everything. I mean, if we
But there are things I can agree with you. Yeah. There are things that I can agree with you on. I can agree with you on the fact that if there is a woman who was sexually abused, that should have been brought out. What I disagree with you on is the playing politics of, well, let's bring it out now, let's not. And I mean, I think we can both agree that Dr. Ford is a fragile woman. Mm-hmm. I'm not.
Well, and if you want to talk about it, I think both sides played politics. But
yeah, I agree. But I think I would hate that we manipulate people's wounds over that. I mean, I think that's what I'm trying to do. Because right now, I see that people are getting very upset, and the conversation is very hyperbolic. I think we got to bring it down, and we can talk, and not say, well, I can't have that conversation. Well, we need to be able to have conversations, so that we can keep it civil. Because if we can't keep things civil, the people out there can't keep things civil. And then people are going to be yelling at people in elevators and kicking people out of restaurants, and I don't like that.
No, but I notice y'all only bring up incidents of what
you have the floor. You can bring it up. I didn't tell you what you could and could not bring up.
But if we're talking about an even ground, then you would bring up both.
What would you like me to? Before we go back, you tell me what you would like me to bring up. I'm very open on bringing everything up. What would you like me to bring up? I haven't asked. I didn't pre-Missy at all? Did I? I mean, I'm just going to be honest.
Well,
I was walking the dog.
Yeah. Well, and I'm just going to apologize to both of you because obviously, if I'm the only one that misunderstood what the purpose of this interview was, then it must have been my misunderstanding because y'all both knew that we were going to be talking about issues that the Republicans and Democrats disagreed with, and I thought we were going to talk about what do we have in common and how can we go forward in repairing the country.
And that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about, but I want to talk about it honestly. I don't want to pretend that we don't have something going on because I don't think that's healing. You know what I'm saying? I think if there's an infection, you got to dig out the infection and then start to heal it. And the infection is that we're not talking to each other. And if you have something that you would like me to address that you think I'm not addressing about this, let me know. Because I think it's a very important conversation.
Yeah. Well, I respect you both, and I've never felt like I couldn't discuss something with y'all. I mean, I don't want to hold up the.
No, but I'm just saying, we'll come back and we'll go to you, and then if you want to bring out something, right now we have people who aren't talking to each other, people who are being kicked out of restaurants, people who don't want to put cruise signs in their yards, people who don't want to wear Make America Great Again hats because they're being attacked, people who are, I mean, this is not a united country. And then we have on top of this whole Kavanaugh thing, and then people are, like you said, there used to be you're guilty until proven you're innocent until proven guilty, and now everyone's
go down the wrong road.
Yeah, and now everyone is
there.
saying, "Well,
Talk
he's
about
guilty."
witch trials.
I know, and that's what I think
She's
everyone
going to
is
float.
now.
She's not going to float. Let's
Yeah.
find out.
And that's where we're coming to, and that's where I don't want to come to. I'm a Black American. I don't want to come there. I mean, the sermon at my church yesterday was, "Blessed are the peacemakers."
Yeah.
We have an opportunity to be a peacemaker, but being a peacemaker is not ignore all the facts. Being and in fact, my pastor said it is not a peacekeeper, not a peace lover, a peacemaker. Mm-hmm. And so that the way we make peace is be honest that there are some balls dropped. I think that we haven't always gotten it right, and even Missy will. We as the Republican Party have not always gotten it right. In my opinion, and this is not a dig to you or any other Democrat, we've gotten it more right than wrong. I mean, I stand here as a freed African-American slave, and that's my lineage. My family were slaves. We were freed by the Republican Party. That's just a fact. I'm not waving flags or anything. So, but I think we have to have open conversations so that we do not break. And I think we're like this close to breaking. So we'll start with you. You tell us, but I don't want to ignore, I don't want to have things where we can't talk about. I want us to handle it civilly, but it's very important to me that we can have conversations.
Well, we can talk about anything. Hell, we were talking about menopause before we started.
Yeah, if we can talk about menopause, we can definitely talk about Kavanaugh. Okay.
We're about ready.
Let's just have a conversation. And because, I mean, you can have a conversation, I can have a conversation, but I'm going to let you start it, and then you can, but I don't want you to feel like no one's beating up. I don't want you to feel that.
Oh no, I don't feel beat up.
Good,
I just feel like I just had not prepared properly for the.
I just want to. I want us to heal. I want us to get together. I want us to not be ran out of restaurants. I want people to have conversations honestly, because I think peace begins with honesty.
That's true. Are we on?
Okay, we're coming back here.
So.
Ready on the closet? I want to bring it.
Ta-da.
All right. Yeah, go ahead. Nice one, Karen.
A different point of
Okay,
view.
round two.
Take two.
Not round.
Fight.
No fight. Well, thanks for joining us back again. And I wanted to frame what this conversation is about. There are differences.
Yes.
There are going to be differences. And I always tell people even identical twins split from the same egg have differences. What we've got to do is find ways to reconcile those differences and to call what's wrong, and to see what's right, and find ways where we can keep the country united instead of splintered, and not have people showing up in elevators yelling or being kicked out of restaurants, because I know you're not approving of that either. So go ahead, Carol.
Well, no, I think you're right. And where I think we begin, that I think all of us can agree upon, is you start out with civility. There's a lot of civility that has been thrown out. And it's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And we got to restore that civility, and it has to start with us. And then when we see people that are in groups in which we're involved, we have to let them know, no, that's not how we act. And I realize that we're certainly on different sides of the fence on who should be the next U.S. Senator for the state of Texas. But when there were folks who surrounded Ted Cruz and his wife at a restaurant in D.C., and they felt the need to leave because of the altercations there, I was sick. I was sick in my stomach. And even though I'm certainly not supporting Ted Cruz, I thought that is no way to treat somebody. And I was very proud of Beto O'Rourke when he came out and he condemned that kind of activity. He said, no, I mean, we're both fighting for the same position, but this is not a personal battle. We got to treat each other with civility. Same with the people at the elevator. And I think, obviously, Lindsey Graham was not yelling at the same volume as the ladies on the elevator. But even the senator who was called upon to follow Lindsey Graham after Senator Graham went off about how this was all the Democrats' fault, and how they were playing politics, and I hope you never win, et cetera, et cetera. Even the next senator said, are we going to take a break after that? Or, I mean, the next senator who I can't remember who it was.
Was that Cornyn?
It wasn't Cornyn, because generally they were going Republican, Democrat in the cadence. But the next senator was kind of shocked at how nasty Senator Graham had been to his own colleagues in the room. But all of those are examples, and I've given Republican and Democrats being the culprits in my examples. All of those are examples of how we can stop acting not civil. I mean, we got to bring it back and say, look, even though I don't disagree with that person, even though I don't agree with that person, I got to respect their right to believe what they believe.
Well, Carol, I couldn't agree with you more. My concern is that we see so many of these high profile, and it could be just that the media attention gets put more in one area than another, right? I mean, we don't know. It could be bad behavior all over. But we are seeing a preponderance on the other side. I'll just say that. I thought Lindsey Graham, I'll just say it for the record, I thought he made a very impassioned plea. Now, but that's a difference in perspective. And I think you brought that up really clearly. And so I listen to that and say, I also try and listen to what the women were trying to convey in the alert. I really do try to hear it, to see what's there, because there's something there, right? But this is not, it's like, kind of like this. We all have our inside voice, we all have our outside voice. It'd be really good if we all took a cue from the kids over in preschool and tried using our inside voice for a little bit. I think there's something like that. And I'll also say, you raised some good points about areas where we can improve. And I would certainly say, let's look at the dais, okay? And I thought it was very good that they had an expert, whether it be a woman or a man, asking very sensitive questions of Dr. Ford. Because I would argue that no politician should be questioning Dr. Ford. Dr. Ford is in a very tenuous state and has been through so much. And I would argue that we need to also recognize that, Brett Kavanaugh has had everything dragged all over. So we need to recognize the humanity in that. I don't think there was a dry eye in America of anybody with a heart that didn't feel badly when they heard about Judge Kavanaugh's children praying for Dr. Ford. I thought that was a really moving piece. And if people didn't, they want to kind of check themselves on the calculations that they're making in the back of their mind. That's just my opinion. Now, where's one of the areas we can improve? And this is kind of regardless of party. there were no women on the Republican side on that dais, okay? There are no women on that Judiciary Committee. So as much as a Texan I am proud to have representation there, we have to recognize that. Now, that is not a Republican or Democratic issue, because the facts are 19.8% of the U.S. House and Senate together are women, okay? So let's do that math and compare that to 53% of the voting electorate are women. So we have a disparity there that regardless of party, we need to look at. That's all. I'm not saying, we're not doing quotas in the United States.
Right.
We're not doing anything like that. But we want to look and say, what is it about the iconography of women candidates that they're not getting through? Now, I'd say we've come a long way, baby, in a short amount of time. The fact that all three of us are here from different backgrounds, and I owe that. That's because of the people, regardless of gender, in our parties that have all said it's time to bring the best talent forward, regardless. At least that's the way I hope we envision it. So I think there's a room in terms of agreement in areas that we can move forward in that way. Texas has a proud heritage of, having women leaders, and we can continue that, and we can lead the nation in that capacity. So that's one thing for us to kind of take a look at. And I would also say that, again, I always do this, and my mom says, you're pretty good at this, Missy. Whenever I'm blaming the other side, the other person, and especially in business, look at it from the other angle and see where we can do better. I wish I could sit down with Maxine Waters and say, hey, I respect that you're doubling down on your position, but it's really unhealthy at this point. Because when I find people in our party doing the same thing, I certainly say, not on my watch. When we had a person running here who had very questionable experience about the way they were essentially allocating funds in their own family, which is their own personal deal, but then they became a candidate here, we said there is no room in the party of Lincoln for that kind of behavior. It takes more bold leadership. And I said to Karen, I think I could get fired over this. I may get kicked out. But you know what? It's the right thing to do because that's who we are. And so I think more of that kind of gracious, thought out, tempered leadership, which I think we're all capable of doing, is very, very helpful. And I would also say the cool part about Texas is, this is the state where you can I had somebody say it so perfectly. It's the only state in the world where you could have a billionaire riding next to a person who doesn't know where their next meal is going to be on the ferry down to one of the beaches, and they'd get along and still drink a beer and have a good time. The more of that we can get back to, the better off we're going to be as Texans.
Well, I agree with that. And you brought up a really good point on the number of women that were represented on the Judiciary Committee. And now this is statistics. I'm not going to say all women are like this or all men are like this, but most studies have shown that women are more likely to cooperate and collaborate with each other, even in elected positions. And women are more likely also to listen to their constituents rather than say, well, I've been elected, they've elected me to rule, so therefore I'm going to just go ahead and make my decisions. So I do think that the presence of women is very important. I think especially with the Judiciary Committee, it would have helped to have had more.
All committees.
Yeah.
let's not exclude them,
Well, that's something the three of us all agree on. So,
Yay! Something we can agree.
Another thing she's pointed out is that, shame on anybody who's not voting who can vote. In the United States, we barely have over a majority of the people eligible to vote that are voting. And in Texas, it's one of the absolute worst percentages of people voting in the nation. And we really, as big as Texas is and as varied as it is, we Texans ought to be voting everywhere we live. So because there's a difference in the way people in Dallas feel and the people in El Paso feel and the people in Bastrop. And so they need to come out and they need to make their voices heard.
Well, I think that you absolutely are right. And the thing that's really interesting, though, is that we need to recognize sometimes a lot of people don't vote because they're just sick of it. They don't go out because they're like, this is just a mess. And this past week has really done nothing to dissuade that, okay? So ultimately, the beauty is free will. This is not like one of those, elections in a dictatorship where we're all voting.
Yeah.
No.
And there's one person on the ballot.
Yeah, and there's one, and there's then the other guy's in jail.
Yeah.
So those are elements that are there that unfortunately are taking root today around the world. So that's why the preservation of democracy is so essential here, and because we lead. I mean, that's our role. But ultimately, people are going to do what they want to do. And I also hope that when they go to vote, it's kind of like, what do I feel like? What are my values? And what are the candidates that are talking to me? How are we interacting? Et cetera. Those are really important things. And so I think we're going to see a lot of interesting things in this. We see high record. We all had record turnout in the primary. So we're going to continue to see that. And anybody who doesn't take this election seriously, I think, is giving them, again, this is all a very important moment. We are going to remember this moment in time, and we will decide where we will go leading forward.
That's right. You brought up two feelings, both of which are not conducive to voting. One of them is the feeling that what's it going to matter? And I think that's almost a helplessness. And I had to fight that when I was watching the Kavanaugh hearings, because I felt like, this result is going to happen no matter what I do. But there's another thing that you also brought up when you were talking about you wish you could sit down and talk with Maxine Waters, and that is the people who usually yell the loudest are the ones that think they're not being heard. And
she's being heard. She knows it. And when you listen to her additional speeches, let all due respect, Carol, she said, not only am I going to do it, I'm going to yell that. Nice try. I love the spin. I'm giving you an A+ as a PR pro, but no. Good job.
And I would give you a long rope, Carol.
Yeah. Nice try. I think no.
In all kumbaya moment.
That you're just not going to go there.
A couple of steps beyond.
But Carol, could you call Maxine and tell her, please stop it?
Well, she doesn't know me.
I bet you she'd take your call. You're the Dallas County. I mean, you're one of the biggest counties. You got say, I got Beto on the other line. Get Beto to call. And if Beto's not taking your call, he's really not listening.
But we can agree.
Oh, I didn't get a yes.
We can agree in general that people who yell the loudest feel like they're not being heard.
I fundamentally disagree with that, but that's one perspective. That's all I'll say.
I do think that it is important to have conversations instead of the yelling on both sides.
Sure.
And I do think that if we don't, what we will lose is greater than the argument. Mm-hmm. And as a leader in the Democrat Party, which is a party I know which you love and you feel nothing but a lot of honor for it, what is your suggestion to be a part of something that you can be proud of when your grandkids are asking about this party, that you could do now or suggest now to calm things down, bring people together, to have a more loving way, a more kinder, gentler way of talking about these issues?
Well, for one, my response is based on my personal experience.
Yeah.
And I have not, of course, been involved necessarily in bringing two different political parties together, though I think that is possible. There's been similar instances where people of different religions have gotten together and worked together, and it's been very successful. What I do, and I know you do, Missy, is every time you have a primary, you then have to get everybody back on the same page, because people were on different sides and voting for different people in the primary. And so after that primary, you got to get them back, or you're not going to have it all together for the general election. And what I thought what we did was very effective, and we contacted all the different organizations, whether they call themselves Democrats or not, but were progressive in nature, and we brought the leaders of those groups together and talked to them about what our plans were for the general election and how we needed them and what they could do to assist. And I think that really helped a great deal.
Well, luckily, we're really lucky because we get to round up Republicans, not socialists. And so let's just be really clear. We don't have a Republican Socialist Club of Dallas. We're really proud of that. What I would say is that, it's interesting this year. Maybe I'm sharing too much in terms of inside politics, and I'm really not PRing this. Mm-hmm. There's more unity in our party than I've ever seen. I actually feel sorry for previous party chairs in Dallas County who are Republicans because we have a level of unity that's very high. And I think that's because we recognize that people work better when we're together than not. So now, were there a few things and are there going to be feelings hurt? Absolutely. And people will come back or they won't. But you can't force them, right? And so I always say, what is your next, where are you going in your leadership journey to the candidates? Because everyone who runs deserves respect for calling and stepping up into that role. And their significant others certainly deserve a lot of credit for that. So that's something that's really important. And I've seen some really gracious things. Are those feelings going to go completely get healed? You know, there's always going to be, like you were mentioning, you know, bit of a tenderness there, but we need to recognize that. And I really encourage candidates, you know, to get on board, and they may or they may not, but that's, you know, that's all we can do along those lines. And then, of course, people love to look at anything that they see as division on the other side of it. Oh, there it is. I don't assume an ounce of division from y'all. I respect where you guys are coming from, as you know that, and we take it real seriously. And we're going to fight what's going on and try and get our votes out there and make sure that people know, have their opportunity to be heard. And I think that the most important thing is I say, you know, hey man, the TV brick doesn't really work. Let's try and do something else. Let's get more active and more involved. And I always say this, you know, some people may get bored or whatever. You get involved in politics, this is an all-consuming experience. You will have friends. You will not be turned away. Even if you're a little annoying like me sometimes, I mean, you know, they're going to keep you around. So it's really exciting. I mean, there's more things that you see about our county. And that's the thing. When you're out there talking to voters, etc., people who are healthy, not like us, who really are just, they're living their lives in Dallas. They're seeing, you know, they're seeing an improved economy. They're seeing lots of advantages. They're seeing job opportunities come open. This is exciting. I can't wait to see what the unemployment numbers are this week. You know, now I'll tell you right now, our productivity numbers are going to take a big hit because nobody in America was working last week toward the end. So from that standpoint, it's kind of like seasonally adjusted for politics. This is going to be down. But these are things that are there. I mean, I was just saying before we were talking about, you know, you were at the fair, Carol, this weekend with your grandchildren, I'm sorry.
Daughter.
And I'm out there at seeing Jordan Spieth's new playground that's for kids of all capabilities. And I looked at it, and by the way, this is one of the best playgrounds in the country for this. That is cool that we are blessed to live in that community.
Yes. Yes, I agree with you there. Well, you know, I think the situation that the Republicans have is something that has been going on long enough that maybe you don't regard it as a problem. But there's the Tea Party, who was around, you know, for several years. And for a lot of years, there was a lot of friction with that, but they seem to have been absorbed into the Republican Party. And then I do actually speak with Republicans. A lot of my friends are Republicans. I continually hear them worried about Donald Trump, wondering, can the party come back to, you know, to find a moderate, because there's so many Republican moderates who have ideas that are similar to the Democratic moderates. And so there's a lot of issues that you can agree on, but Donald Trump has taken it to an extreme, but more than taking issues to an extreme, he has taken, well, he's dropped civility as even a vocabulary word that he uses. And I know that y'all don't agree with everything that Donald Trump has done.
You know, Carol, I find it fascinating. I'm a tremendous fan of the president. The president has brought more opportunity, more peace. We go from having a potential where we had decades of nothing being done, but other being taken advantage by the North Koreans. And now we have, albeit an awkward conversation, a conversation of beautiful letters and people loving one another. So I'll take that, as awkward as that may be, over the alternative of getting nothing done. And I'll take a roaring economy where our biggest concern is how do we keep this thing from going too fast to the new normal of slugging it out. And I will tell you, as a business owner cutting the front of paychecks, it was brutal. It was brutal. So ultimately, people in America vote on their pocketbook. Now, is he a perfect candidate? No. No candidates are perfect candidates. But he is the president that was chosen out of 17 folks, and he won. And I know there's a lot of people that are still shaking their head, not quite getting it. But that's okay. Look at your 401k and see where that's going. Look at the opportunities for your children and see where that's going. Sure. Carol, I would argue that, people may say, oh, we wish. Well, at the end of the day, that's the cool part, is that we have elections every 4 years. And if people don't like the way they see something, they have the opportunity to run. The saddest thing was when people kind of go, oh, but they don't run. They don't get their voice out there. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the beauty of the democratic process. And we're looking forward to seeing how things go. And I feel good things for 2020. Is it a completely different type of politics? Yes and no. I was listening to some stuff about the Mexican-American War the other day and seeing the tension that was going on at that time and how people, the division that we had in terms of where the presidencies were taking us, et cetera. This is nothing new. I'm literally making a point of studying our history to see where have we been when we had this kind of division before, and what did we do to improve it? And what did we do to come forward and bring up our highest and best self? And that's an exciting opportunity to learn.
So you don't see any friction anymore between the Republican Party and the Tea Party?
I would argue that the friction would really be between the socialists who are taking over your party versus what you've got your common sense. And to your point, the friction is far less than it had been in the past. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well,
it's a good question.
The fact that there's a socialist club does not mean that they've taken over the Democratic Party. But that's I understand.
Okay, because you guys are already running on that platform, so it's fine. And the voters in Texas will have their say. I can't help it.
Okay, it sounds like I'm debating Ted Cruz. I mean, constantly throwing out. So it's probably about the fourth time you've accused us of being socialist.
Third.
Okay,
but I'm going into the fourth, absolutely, because here's, again, walk away. If you try and walk away this, now this is not the platform for that, and I'm not going to go there, but I just will say that in terms of where things are, the Dallas Morning News was even covering this rise of Democratic Socialists and their intention. It's not our view. Their intention infiltrated.
But their intention is not what's important. It's what the Democratic Party's intention is, and I think it's.
So you're saying there is a rift between the socialists.
I'm saying, it's not that we don't have issues that we agree on. I'm just saying that the Democratic Party is not the Socialist Party. And I've always believed that the Republican Party really wasn't the Tea Party. But when Donald Trump was elected, I lost hope with that. It seemed like...
Well, that's why you're the Democratic Party chair. That's great. You can lose all the hope you want about us. We're doing just fine on that. So we're excited. The president goes out and does rallies around the country because they work.
Well, he only does rallies in areas where he won, so...
Well, but when he comes here in Dallas, that'll be a different tune then. So, let's keep our eyes toned.
Oh, I'm sure he'll raise a lot of money in Dallas. There's a lot of conservative people.
Oh, I think you're going to see a lot of grassroots efforts. I have nothing that I can say that officially, but I'll just put that out there.
You're saying the Republicans have grassroots efforts?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well,
when you walk hundreds of thousands of doors in Dallas County, that is grassroots. That is just clear as day.
Okay. Well, I do know that Trump's popularity has gone down significantly, and you mentioned about the
which
economic.
Is common in off cycles. Obama certainly had a rough time, in his midterms as well.
Well, he never went that far down. But what I wanted to say, if I could finish my statement, I wanted to say that David Axelrod, who is generally regarded as an extremely intelligent political consultant, said the economy has been on the rise for 35 months straight, and yet Trump has only been in office, since 2016, or the beginning of 2017, and his final statement was, "Do the math," and I think that's
I'll do the math. 4% is a lot better than 1.2%.
But Carol, let me just interject this, and not to interrupt you. When you talked about the Trump's approval rating, do you think it has anything that is significant that his approval rating on Black Americans is now at 37%?
Well, I think overall, I think overall people were very upset when he started separating children from their parents at the border. That was not anything that America had ever done.
But do you think that Black Americans' approval rating of him going to, 37% for a Republican president is pretty high. I mean, do you think that that is something that Democrats should take issue with, or should acknowledge, or be a little cautious about?
Well, I mean, I guess you could say that we should be cautious about everything. I'm not concerned about that.
Okay.
Whenever it comes to polls, I want to know, okay, who took the poll and when was it taken and all that stuff. But, I will acknowledge this. Donald Trump is the president. There's a lot of stuff that we could argue about how he became president, but that's not going to really bring us together.
Right. And neither will not my president the day after with running around the Capitol. When I was there, I was over, literally, the president is sworn in, and then that weekend, you have not a moment of, let's see who the new president is, let's let him move into the White House. No, instant protests. And by the way, that means no open mind. As I left the inauguration in Washington, D.C., walking the streets, people were burning things in the streets. That is not what I saw when I left the Clinton inauguration at all when I lived in Washington, D.C. Didn't see that. And so again, that's where I think we're all at a really important crux, which is we've all needed to calm it down.
Yeah.
We've all got to stop and say, you know what? Not in my America, as opposed to yelling, not my president.
Well, I understand. Are you talking about the
Inauguration?
Women's March, the next day? Or are you talking about that?
Both. So as I was leaving, I don't want to make it sound like they were burning things at the Women's March. They were not. They were very angry. They were very intense, and that's their right. But it is interesting, the timing, because we don't know. I mean, Donald Trump could have come in and brought in the most powerful legislation ever on the planet to help a particular group that would have been like, and yet you folks are yelling at me in the streets. I mean, there was not even a moment to pause and reflect and think and say, what does this mean? And I remember watching President Obama get sworn in, and this is in front of my team, my PR team, my company, and I looked at Speaker Boehner, and I looked at the president, and I said, see those folks? I said, those two folks are going to determine how this all goes from here. And so that's a moment we just have to observe. Let's wait and see and let them set their tone. Right. No honeymoon was given here, not announced.
No.
Carol, and I know you as the chair for the Dallas County Democrat Party have thought about this, about how you can bring us together as a party or as a county together, at least here, and then maybe be a light nationally. So what one thing can you suggest to all the people out there that will hear you, that, like, can you say something kind and gracious about Donald Trump as the president? Can you lead? And I'll ask Missy the same thing but can you lead with a level of grace or something that you can say, we can say this? Because when President Obama was president of this great country, and I tell people I've been a Republican ever since I met Ronald Reagan, but I never one day wished him a bad day. I hoped and prayed that President Obama would have been a great president for the simple fact that he was going to be my president in my lifetime. And I'm sure you wish those things for President Trump because he's your president at your lifetime. Can you share something about President Trump and about the Republican Party that would be grace to lead the way for that conversation to happen, not just locally in Dallas County, but outside in the greater state and, of course, in our nation?
Well, I certainly have never wished him ill personally, and when I was faced with the stark reality that he was going to be the president of the United States, instead of the person who I thought was probably one of the most qualified people to ever run for president, I was certainly dismayed. But I did pray that he take his job seriously as a president, and that I wished him well in leading the nation positively. I don't know that it's really healthy for our conversation for me to talk about the many ways in which I've been disappointed, but I can tell you that personally I've not wished him ill will.
Is there something you can say kindly about him?
Well, he seems to love his family very much.
Okay. Missy.
Yes.
I don't know if we're there yet, but I'll take that as a positive. What can you say positively about the Democrat Party and the things that they're doing to kind of launch a kinder, gentler way to be able to see grace on that side as well?
Well, I applaud Carol personally. I mean, you're a breath of fresh air compared to what we've seen, and I really hope that more people take their cue from you. I really do. And I think that we've got a very important city and county, and the more we can do to make sure that it thrives in the most dignified manner possible, the better off we're all going to be.
Well, thank you. I do have a complaint. She got an easier question.
What was the same question?
No, my question was to say something nice about Donald Trump. And I mean, I could have gone a long way saying something nice about Missy. I mean, Missy has.
Missy, what did you like to say something nice about Donald Trump?
You know what? I'm going to pass on that. I'm on the record.
But Missy and I have gotten along. She's already at the civilized threshold that we were talking about, where we have to begin to bring our parties together. Hey, anybody that can get elected to the Dallas County Republican Party chair position unanimously is a very special person. I don't know that the Democratic Party has ever done anything unanimously, but we get there and we progress and we have a lot of passion and we are really interested in human rights. But enough about us. I do think that there are a lot of members of the Republican Party who I have observed, especially on the national level, who make it very obvious that they're working for what they think is best for their constituents. And I admire that. Whether I agree with the position they're taking or not, I admire the fact that they honest to goodness are working for the best interests of their constituents.
Okay. Well, I guess that's a good way to, as peaceful as we can get. And what in Dallas County, I know that elections, early voting is October 22nd.
Until the 2nd of November.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we want people, what would you suggest people do? Get themselves educated about the candidates. Forms still going around with judges, of course, all the way down the ballot, not just people at the top of the ballot, but all the way through the ballot.
The League of Women Voters of Dallas has a voter's guide. The Dallas Morning News has a voter's guide. I'm sure that if anybody wanted to call Missy or me, we'd be glad to tell them who we think is best. But one thing we both agree on is that everybody eligible to vote needs to vote.
And that's educated about it, right? You don't want someone who doesn't know anything, that can't spell Texas voting, because then they don't
just
know what
like the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts always say, be prepared.
Yes. Missy, you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think the most important thing is that you also, it's one thing to read the voter guide, but if you really want to, I mean, social media is right at your fingertips. Take a look at what's going on. Take it, and if you really want to get an up close and personal, I guarantee you, you call any one of those campaigns, they're happy to have you help and volunteer.
And they all have websites.
Yes. So there's no, it's good to take a look there in addition, so you can supplement that and assess what's going on. And then I always say, IRL, in real life, get into it, go find out. And so that way you can see what's there. I think it's really important because there's a lot of talent here and with a lot of influence. And so I think it's important, though, when you make that decision for who you're voting for and the party that you're backing, that you feel really good about that.
Well, as my pastor said yesterday in church, blessed are the peacemakers, and may we also be one of them. So Thank you for being a part of a different point of view. And even though you have different points of view, we're still Texans and still Americans. So go your candidate.
That's right. And we still like each other.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yes, and you'll find something great about Trump, I'm sure. I can even give you a list. So
I bet you can.
Thanks again.
Thank you, Karen. Appreciate it. Thank you, Carol.
Thank-
Mhm.